So I'm Craig Jeffery. I'm the Managing Partner of Strategic Treasure. I'm here with Art Lorenz, Treasurer of Hunter Douglas. We've done a number of things over a lot of years. So Art, thank you for joining us at the conference today.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So as we talk about this concept of Treasury security framework, the idea of protecting against fraud and controls, we see it as a time of crime does pay. There's a significant payoff for organizations as they approach theft of company material, either from external sources or internal sources. We have a very significant survey that shows a lot of that data. We invite you to download that, but just for all intents and purposes, crime does pay, and organizations have to have a strong, robust, a muscular posture against that. So as we talk about receipts and disbursements, maybe it makes sense, Art, to just talk about the overall framework, a security framework, a control framework that's necessary to set the right kind of structure in place. And maybe you just make some comments on that.
Sure. Well, as you say, crime does pay, and it's not just external crime, it's also internal crime. So there's a lot of issues that happen within the organizations, so we all want to believe our employees would never do anything, but sometimes that's not always the case. So you have to actually be concerned about both internal and external. And I think, it's not just Treasury as the Treasury piece that when you're making the payment or you're sending the wire or anything like that, it really has to be the whole process. So from the beginning to the end, you really want to look at that. It's not just the piece that Treasury does, but it's really the whole process has to be looked at and reviewed. Otherwise, you're not really going to capture the things that are occurring downstream. So you really need to look at everything. And it's, payables, receivables, payroll, anything that has any kind of do with a transaction payment or receipt has to be reviewed.
So each of those represents some type of point of exposure that you have to manage. I think, in terms of framing what we're going to talk about, we might look at third-party data, software, whether it's banking, treasury management systems. We might look at the interchange of that. We would look at the exterior of the organization, the perimeter IT security. Also looking at internal, how does an organization protect things internally? But processes is really kind of the focus of our discussion. So maybe we could talk and start about payments. Payments is a big area of fraud where there's challenges. Everyone talks about segregation of duties, but there's a lot more to putting up a muscular approach. Why don't you talk about some examples on the payment side?
Well, I think, again, you have to go back to the beginning of the process. So what you want to review is the whole process, and you have to go in detail of that process and look into it. And the more decentralized you are, the more risk you're going to have. So as Hunter Douglas is very decentralized, we have 20 or 30 different divisions that are making payments. So that adds to the risk. They sometimes can veer off on their own. So you really need to go back from the beginning, and you really need to look in detail, because we've had an issue where something simple as the accounts payable department didn't seal the envelopes where the checks were going out. So the checks were able to be accessed by someone. They were able to get a hold of the checks and then able to commit fraud on that. Fortunately, we were able to stop it in time, but you don't even seal the envelopes for an accounts payable check, that's an issue. So you really got to go back from the very beginning of the process, look how it works, document that process, and again, look at the details and look at all the specifics in that process.
So checks are a big exposure, an issue. The physical protection of those is one area. What about ACH or wires? What are your concerns there? You mentioned having like 30 different divisions or so that can make payments. There's multiple points of exposure there. What about ACH and wires?
Well, we've tried to centralize that. So although the payables is decentralized, we've tried to at least centralize that as much as possible. And we use the bank's controls as much as possible. So where they have dual controls or required dual controls, we put that in place. On ACH debits, we've centralized that all to one account. So we don't have multiple accounts being allowed to have ACH debits. We put blocks on everything else. So we've tried to use the controls of the banks. That's where the banks really can provide a lot of support for you in the control process. But one thing you also have to do is you document your controls. You have to get management's buy-in on them, because a lot of the latest, one of the latest phishing schemes is management calls up and says, or management emails, oh, I want $50,000 right away. Now, you would never think anyone would actually believe this, but they are pretty good. If you look at their emails, they may have one letter off or a dot or something, and if it's going to a junior level person, they may be concerned and want to do the right thing and act quickly. So the controls you put in place and the procedures you put in place, you have to get management to buy in, because if they actually do send a $50,000 request and it isn't acted upon immediately because it has to go to 2 people and 2 people have to approve it before that goes out, they have to say that's okay. They have to agree to that and not sort of circumvent the process and say, no, that shouldn't happen for me. It has to be agreed to by management. Everybody has to be on the same page. Everybody has to be agreeing to the processes that are there.
That's great. I mean, that idea of what's commonly called business email compromise or imposter fraud, depending on who's talking about it, is that issue where someone sends you instructions, it looks real, it may even come from their email address, but the supporting documentation maybe just scans or something else, and there's this rush. And there might be a secrecy element to it. Get this out. It's an acquisition. You've got to get it out. So our survey, we did an extensive survey. 77% of companies had at least one attempt of business email compromise in the past 2 years, and over 10% of them had experienced at least one loss from it. So when you think about it, you're not going to believe it, a lot of Treasury people have believed it because it looks real, it's urgent, you're going to lose your job if you don't make this payment because it's about an acquisition, so you respond to it. So that seems pretty crucial.
One of the other ones that we've had almost happen to us is where your vendor sends you an email saying, we've changed our banking instructions. So people get it, it's in their accounts payable department, they say, oh, vendors change their banking instructions, I'm going to change them in the system. So again, those processes and procedures have to be in place. Everybody has to agree on them, and you have to continually reinforce it. It's a process. It's not a one-time event. You have to keep that training going. People change jobs, people leave, people forget. So you need to constantly be training them on the processes and how things are going to be done at the organization and what they need to do. Something similar, another simple one that can be put in place, another control, is your master data files. Those have to be only changed, or they have to be reviewed. Any changes made have to be reviewed by somebody. That should be in place also. And everybody has to understand the process and follow the process.
I think that's a great example, especially, it might be a lot harder to break into a system and change AP, the records of where payments are going to go. That may be very hard. It might be a lot easier to do that social engineering or manipulate someone to make a change. One aspect of that too is like having segregation of duties. There might be, the other thing we think about is that out-of-band confirmation. If I send a request in, if I'm a crook, a criminal, I want you to change it, I can send a letter saying, please change remittance, knowing that there's a real vendor, please change remittance to this bank information. And there's a callback number that I have control over. So someone from AP plugs it in. If they just have a policy that says confirm it, it's easier for them to look at the number here, call the number on there, which is somebody I control, and that number's controlled, and they go back, they make the change, they're like, yeah, this is the right number. This is awesome. You can do it, and then all of a sudden it's not out of band. It's not looking at the overall database.
So you have to have and that's why you're going to get into the details where you have to call either the person you know at the company, or you have to call the previous number that you had and not the number that is sent to you in the email. So again, all that kind of has to be a detailed process, and they have to understand that that's what they need to do.
Yeah. So to me, that's like the segregation of duties that you described inside, and then your confirmation process is a segregation of points of contact. So the out of band is two different elements that say the same thing. I get you. That's excellent. So what you talked about, it's not an event. This idea of managing control and fraud. It's not an event. It's a process. What do you think about training or ongoing communication? What is crucial for people to understand about this idea? It's a process, not an event.
But communication is a big thing. You want to continually reinforce it with communications. And I think you really need to go out and train them or have some kind of online training session for them. Emails are good, but a lot of times people don't always read their emails. They don't pay much attention to them. So if it's an online webinar or a session or something that they have to attend and actually be there for it, or actually listen to it, that it's required every so often. I think that is critical because you can send a lot of emails. People don't always read their emails. We all do it. We'll delete it. It's good, but that's one reinforcement. But then again, actual training via webinar or in person is really critical.
Okay, excellent. That tends to be an area, an event happens, they communicate it once and everyone's done. 5 years later, hey, we sent out an email about it. Excellent. So we talked about what's an overall position about a Treasury control framework. Art gave a number of examples on the payment side. How do we control payments? Maybe we can look at receipt side. Sometimes we don't think of receipts as a problem, but let's talk about that. There's exposures on the receipt side. So maybe you could talk about checks and we can move on to other areas, or start where you'd like on that, Art.
Well, I mean, one of the simple areas, this was a little while back at Hunter Douglas, we had something called Fax Check. So basically what it was, when we wanted to collect money real quick from our customers, we, if they were late in payments or something like that, we wanted the money right away, we had this little system that they would give us the okay and we would cut a check for their bank, on their bank. So we would actually be writing checks on their banks. That's not exactly the best thing to begin with, but even worse, we had the data for all the bank accounts in an unsecured place. So that was a real critical item that could have turned into a really bad situation. We never had anything happen, but we had a lot of data out there and a lot of risk. So again, you never know what's going out there, and that was created by people in the field. They thought it was a great idea. They started doing it. We finally found out about it. We were able to put a stop to it. But once people start doing something, they don't like to change. So it's hard to get them to make that change to a new process. They like to continue what they're doing, and we did finally able to do that, and what we did was move to ACH. So that was a good process for us to take it out of that. A better way to collect the money. We knew there was going to be our money the next day versus whenever the check cleared. So it was a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. That's that issue of competing KPIs. So you have someone charged with improving working capital, they got to get the collection, so getting information in, we can create our own check off of their account. You can post it so it's off the receivables list. Working capital sounds better, our DSO's down, but you don't get your money any quicker. You expose the organization, you expose all of your customers' data to an unsecured location, or unsecured database of banking information. So you've addressed the core need that they had and protected the organization. So hey, you need it faster, but let's do it in a secure manner. You collected it sooner, had better liquidity, so excellent. Anything else? I mean, you're receiving items, you have a lot of locations as you acquire companies, they receive stuff in-house. How do you manage that? I mean, checks or other things coming locally versus a lockbox or some other area?
Right. Well, we try to again use the bank's processes however possible. So we moved to RDC years ago. That enabled us to improve our float. We eliminated the process of having to go to the bank. So we took one more step out of it. And then again, we just try to put in the right controls to begin with. Segregation of duties, it has to be received by someone at the front desk, has to be stamped. Only that person would bring it to a certain person in the accounts receivable organization. So it's again just developing controls that are being followed and we feel are what we need to do, and then taking out whatever we can. So we pushed to lockboxes as much as possible. Not everybody, again, wanted to do that. They were comfortable receiving it in-house, but we pushed almost everything to lockbox, and where it didn't make sense to go to lockbox, we moved to remote deposit capture. So again, trying to eliminate as much as possible having that check floating around.
Sure, stop it, keep it out of the process, or convert it to another method. I know you use card in some cases, or I assume you use card in some cases on the collection side. Card can be quick, but there's some data that you have to protect. You have any examples there?
Well, for us, we've taken the option of not actually not maintaining any of the data ourselves. So we went to a third-party Paymetric, who, when it comes in via of our online website, that data is automatically captured by Paymetric and goes to our merchant services processor. So we tried to take ourselves out of it as much as possible. Always trying to use a third-party option whenever we can, and not trying to do things that we're not experts at. So if we can give it to somebody else who's an expert at it, we try to do that. On the other options, when it's not coming in via our website, it goes directly into our merchant services processor system. We don't have anything on it, and we don't maintain anything. But one example, again, these little things that can come up. People were receiving credit cards for payments, and they would have a form that our customers had to fill out, saying, well, I authorize to charge my credit card. Here's my credit card information. So we could then charge the card. And what they would do is file that. So we ended up with thousands and thousands of credit card information on file, certainly not in compliance. So sometimes it's just simple things that can resolve the problem. So what we did was simply put all the credit card information on the bottom of the form, put like a little tear out section. They were able to tear that piece off after they've used it to process the credit card, and then kept the signature piece on file. So again, sometimes little processes, little changes can make a big difference.
Right, versus trying to black it out or white it out every time and maintain and have that exposure. So any other final thoughts on a Treasury security framework, or any other issues that might provide other people with ideas on what to do to present a more muscular, strong posture against fraud or control weaknesses?
I think it's just continuous. You're not only continually training people, but you've got to be continually reviewing and monitoring the process, looking at all the specifics, looking at the details that are going on, and finding out what's going on in your organization. Because, like I said, if we have 20 operations out there that are doing things, very easily they can start something that we're not aware of. So we have to continually monitor, review, and train.
I think a lot of people can sympathize with that. A lot of things going out that people don't know, right? They're trying to be smart, help the customer, the supplier, whatever, and they do something that creates an element of risk that's unknown. And those are great stories. And I think one thing I would just leave you with is, as you look at your operation or your area, and you have here's the procedures about what we do, the auditors aren't going to find out the violations of that. Management doesn't know until you sit and walk through that process, like you said at the beginning. You see that process, you see those things show up. It's like, oh, they're not doing it. They're changing the underlying records, and they have a way to do it that violates not only policy, but creates a liquidity issue, a risk issue, a control issue. Thank you. Appreciate everyone coming. Art, thanks for spending some time, and he's around.